I'm a big believer in, hey, let's us regulate versus being told what to do, because I think we're better off as an industry to self-regulate than have some 800-year-old gray hair guy telling me what to do. Or worse even, 10 different gray hair guys from 10 different nations all coming up with bizarre analog regulatory, like GDPR in the payments industry and some of these European compliance things, total train.
Did you clear your cash flow?
We talked the other day, and one of the things that I loved, the quote you said was, people are always chasing the new shiny industries, but what they should be doing is going and disrupting the old fucked up industries. So I love that as a theme for this episode. And, just intro for you. You're Gary Cardone. You've got background in fintech. I think you told me you were doing some energy trading in the early part of your career, founded Chargebacks 911, which is a SaaS company helping e-commerce businesses fight chargebacks. And I think you're doing some stuff, angel investing or some kind of investing in crypto, platform companies now. So I'm really interested to dive into all that and just, hear more about where you see the fintech and crypto industry going from here.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I appreciate, Brian, you doing this. I think guys like you and others that do a really good job that bring on logical people, it's really helpful to the industry. I actually think what you're doing is going to massively disrupt the education system, because we're beginning to learn how we can use these virtual tools, for lack of a better word, or the ability for you and I to compress geography. Like, what have we done here? We've compressed geography. You're in Philadelphia. I'm in St. Pete, and we're having a conversation that, I would have to travel a long way, have a meal with you, do all that. So this is becoming better. And who would have imagined, back to your question, who would have imagined that this would have been happening in 1990? Or that you could carry 1 million photographs and music on a small thing that weighs less than a pound in your pocket. You would have said that I was crazy. In fact, most people told Enron they were crazy when they started talking about fiber trading in, 10-minute segments. Everybody thought that was absolutely mind-boggling crazy. I build the case they were absolutely right, but they were 20 years early.
Yeah, they were trying to do Netflix back when Blockbuster was still the king, but Enron also, got a little over their handlebars, I think, on, running a real company.
You think so? I used to compete very aggressively with Enron and had a lot of respect for them. But they're literally, they would have 10 staff member to my one. I used to play poker with them, and they'd show up, 7 guys would show up at my house from Enron. I'm like, here we are again, 8-man table, and there's 7 Enron guys. I started seeding it with some of my real commodity trading guys that were just animals, and the game kind of busted up. The Enron guys didn't like that. But I learned a lot from those guys. One of the great quotes that I learned from a guy named Greg Whaley, who was ex-West Point president of Enron, legitimate guy. I mean, the stuff that happened had nothing to do with him, but Jeff Skillings, who was the architect of most of this stuff, asked Greg one day, he said, hey, how do we become a $76 billion company or $75 billion company? And Greg says, I think we need to make $75 billion. and so here we are today, 2023, learning that, you probably need to make some money to build these companies. And I think a lot of people, what we're going through right now, not just in crypto, but the whole universe, is a lot of business models are coming under question, including some of the companies you just spoke of. The Netflix of the world, I think they're all beginning to look at themselves and go, what now? Now that we've disrupted The
I think
old
that's true, but I saw a headline last night for Deal. I don't know if you know the company DEEL.
Yes.
They're like a payments and HR platform for international teams, and their revenue is 295 million. Nothing to sneeze at. It's a pretty awesome revenue considering they were founded in 2018. But their valuation, the headline was a $12 billion valuation, which is still a 30x multiple. After this whole, like the last 2 quarters, we're now in Q1 of 2023, and obviously 2022 is a little bit of a bleed out for a lot of SaaS businesses. So it's still amazing that there's 30 times multiples out there.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of money still out there. There's a lot of money parked on the sidelines. And I think that there's also, I don't know the metrics on that particular company. There's a lot of payment companies that need to do something now. They either need to change their entire culture. I mean, you got to remember the payments industry is about 70 years old. And SWIFT, the international settlements platform, is 68 or 70 years old. I mean, people, because I'm in this particular industry with a chargebacks 911, they're like, hey, you're a little rough on the payment guys. I'm not being rough on the payment guys. I think these are awesome companies. But when you're 70 years old, like history shows everyone, these cycles have a way of changing leaderships over 100-year cycles. I mean, you just don't stay the lead quarterback for 100 years, or the lead greatest football team, or the greatest tennis player, or the greatest anything. Look at Walmart. I mean, Walmart almost lost everything to a startup called Amazon. And now the question is, would that have happened in a real interest rate market? Or did that only occur? Netflix. Could Netflix actually create its business model today in a 6 to 8% interest rate market? That's a really good question. I actually think the best companies that are built are being built today, because I was born in 1958. It was the largest population of babies of any year ever. In the middle of a recession, 18 years later, when I'm leaving school, it was the biggest outflow of babies who are now moving into the employment market. So there were more people looking for jobs by massive factors. And if you grew up then, you learned how to get a job. I learned how to get a job. I have literally gone to people and said, I'll work for free. No problem. In 2008, I went to ArcLight Capital. The whole world was leaving Wall Street, getting fired. I got a job in 2008. And flew up there, met the owner and said, look, I'll work for free. If you don't like what I do, shoot me in the head in 3 months. And I ended up working with them for two or 3 years. Didn't particularly like that work, because I like kind of owning a project and like, I don't want to use somebody's money to invest in it. And then, okay, somebody else runs it. I actually like getting my hands dirty. So this is an awesome juncture that we're at, that we can look at all the problems. I don't tend to do that. I tend to look at these anomalies like SBF and Celsius and Galaxy, and this is normal. This is what happens in evolving markets. People like Enron blow up. All the natural gas and all the electricity kept flowing. Like nothing happened, okay? Really, if we really look at it, these companies just got their business models blew up in their face. They didn't have a business model. They had a thieving model, and they're gone. And guess what? The energy business is still alive and well. The Bitcoin industry, no matter how many people go out of business, will be fine and well, because the basic construct makes a lot of sense. Whether these other coins make it or not, the lack of education for most of these investors, that really needs to get dealt with in a serious way. And I think that's why I love the kind of stuff guys like you are doing, because you could educate employees. Hey, nobody's paying 10%. when the Fed's paying zero. Okay, without you taking massive, massive risk, it's not feasible that a company like Celsius can pay you 10% and the Fed is given zero. Okay, like it just doesn't make any sense. So that's down to people going, okay, either they're just really dumb, ignorant. I think that's really the case, the ignorance, or they're just extremely greedy.
Well, it's exactly that. History repeats itself over and over. I mean, you can go all the way back. It's not necessarily exactly like an Enron or SBF situation, but all the way back to like I think it was the 1800s with the Rothschild family. They basically built the largest horse network in the world. Mostly it was over in Europe back then, so they could move messages. There was no internet, there's no phones or faxes or any telegraphs back then, so that you had to move information on horse, and they would move information from city to city. And if there was a war being fought in say like Israel, whatever that way, the Bethlehem, let's say there's a war being fought in Bethlehem or somewhere in the Middle East, they get a horse back to London or Paris before the government gets the horse back, so they know the war is won or lost before the rest of the civilization there knows, so they can trade on that information. And basically they built a foreign exchange network to trade on information because their horse network, their information network was faster than anybody else.
Right.
And it got to the point they had no accounting system. I was reading about this the other day. They had no accounting system. So they had no clue where their money was. And they would basically run out of money in different cities because they didn't know where the money was at any given time because they're moving it back and forth physically on horses.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like our governments, right? They're just not doing the horses. They're just going, hey, I just sent you $1 trillion. Okay, trust me.
And it's just a database, just updating a couple numbers,
Yeah, it's always funny to me because people talk about, hey, when CDBCs and all the digital stuff. I'm like, all of your stuff is already digitized. Like, don't sit here and listen to these people like you're not already trading digital. Most everything you do is already digital. Very few people have any money in their pocket.
I forget what it was, but I read something like there's only $1 trillion USD in paper money.
Yeah, I don't know what that number is, but it is a limited supply of paper.
It's like in the low single-digit % of like total liquid money.
Yeah. I don't understand why more people don't carry cash. It's mind-boggling to me that I was on a podcast with Brad Lee recently, and he talks about going to the ATM. I'm like, dude, why would you go to an ATM and pay? I mean, you're a rich guy. You pay 3.5%. He's like, well, I just get a lot of it, because it's limited, it's capped out. I'm like, it's still a fee. Why are you scared to put $10,000 in your pocket? It doesn't weigh anything. And I
mean, it's weird. Like, I don't see the point necessarily in carrying cash because it's like, people say, oh, I need cash on hand. But, if the bank goes belly up, then the cash is worthless too. It's not, it's.
Well, the cash in your pocket would be worth a lot.
You think so?
Oh, if you have cash in your pocket. I'll tell you an interesting story. I was in Amsterdam at a payments show, and there was a whole contingent that said, look, we want to do, some guy's going to travel from London to Amsterdam with Bitcoin only. Some guy's going to do cash. Some guy's going to do credit cards, and they were going to have a race about who could get to Amsterdam first. I thought it was kind of a cheeky, weird test because you're comparing apples and oranges. What I did was at 2:00 in the morning after a trade show finished, all the bars released, Amsterdam had terminated all Uber and Lyft drivers. There was a Guns N' Roses show that was expelling thousands of people. Here we are, 2:00 in the morning. Most people are a little, had a drink or two. I'm walking with some women back to the hotel, 5 miles. Can't get a taxi. Okay. And we got one guy going, here's my Bitcoin. One guy, here's my credit card. Well, I pull out a smashing, beautiful collection of $100 notes. I was the only one who got a taxi. Okay. Because they saw, I'm not going to get any charge back. This guy isn't a credit card guy. This guy isn't a Bitcoin guy. This guy is a cash guy. Okay. And
I hear you, but on the
I
flip
literally
side
was the only guy picked up, man.
I hear you on the flip side of that, though. If the banks go belly up, then the government has to step in and try to ensure the deposits, and then that's going to fail pretty quickly. If multiple banks are going belly up, the whole system collapses, and then cash is worth nothing at that point.
Yeah. No, if it all happened instantaneously, I agree with you. I'm just saying that money in your pocket, if you can grab money, because I'm not a big believer in this. Bitcoin takes over all the currency on the planet. I don't believe in DeFi is perfect solution for everything. I can build a case. There's a lot of reasons to use centralized finance. I think the way this works out is you live in both worlds. You can't just go, okay, like I'm going to DeFi. Everything's DeFi. I mean, quite frankly, the credit card industry is very DeFi'd in reality. And it's too fractured. Too many people touching too many things. So there are like disputes, in my opinion, disputes on credit cards should be centralized activity. Like an agnostic. Now the key is agnostic centralized. So I just think that this world is going to evolve into a full digital world. It's not going to just tomorrow morning. We're going to destroy the US dollar. There's too many moving pieces. I mean, the disruption there. I just listened to something from BZ, I think at Binance. He's like, there's disruption and then there's total disruption. But total disruption is not real. It's too destabilizing to a marketplace that's really developed over 300 or 400 years.
Yeah, it would be like the transition from cash. At one point, everything was all cash and checks to digital banking systems and eventually credit cards. Like that transition from cash to credit cards, that took decades, multiple decades
That's exactly right. The adoption for that was very challenging. And it'll be a similar challenge that we're dealing with today. And the pitch is exactly the same. Hey, this is going to be more efficient. You're going to have less problems. You're going to have less NSF. You're going to have less bankruptcies. You're going to have less people touching things. I haven't yet to see any of that happen. I have seen a lot more transactions everywhere in both ecospheres. So I think the digital space would do well to quit bitching about the old space. And it would do better to figure out, because we have our own problems, right? A lot of them. I think it's better off like figuring out how to help that industry and not belittle it. And if you are going to belittle it, you might want to know the actual stats of what is it you're trying to fix, right? Things like why didn't the Bitcoin industry ever talk about settlements on credit cards being not an hour, but 180 days? I mean, you're better off.
Bitcoin, though, was founded on like this fear of like an apocalyptic fear of, banks collapsing, governments collapsing. How do you transact? Like that was kind of the founding principle for Bitcoin. And, now, and then it kind of turned into, at first it was technological early adopter kind of thing. And then it's eventually turned into like a money grab for, everybody and their mother who's thinking it's, the next thing to invest in and, remortgage their house and put it all in Bitcoin. And so it's had an interesting wave. It's almost like, what's that book with the cycles of adoption? Oh man, I'm totally blanking. Crossing the chasm. It's
Rubicon?
Is it? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's like crossing the chasm where you have the very early the very early adopters, and then the early adopters. And
most innovators are in what I call innovator investors, like the people buying Tesla early on. We need those people, right? You look at them and go, wow, they're just rich. It's like, no, you need these people because they're having to buy a really small supply. The price is not conducive to wholesale type pricing. The first iPhone I bought was probably more expensive than they are today in relative terms. I mean, just, I don't mind investing in new ideas, but I need to understand I'm probably paying too much. I like in that thesis, right? I think it's investing in Bitcoin today at 23,000 is a safer bet than buying it at 300 8 years ago.
I could see, yeah, because the chances of it failing at 300 are a lot higher than the chances of it failing at this point.
Yeah.
Hindsight's 2020. Obviously, if you could, use a time machine and go back and buy it at 300, do it all day long.
But even if you look at it from that perspective, I still think it was more risky then. You didn't have the adoption. You have some. I was in New York this past week, and I see more interest from more mature people in this space today than I've ever seen in my life. I walked away from 3 days of being in New York, being like, whoa, this space is getting ready to get very serious.
What specifically stood out to you?
The amount of intellectual capital that's being invested by companies. I mean, people normally talk about, oh, look, Goldman Sachs just put $10 billion to work. Before they did that, they put a whole team of people on a floor. They had the expense of that floor. They had the expense of the staff. And these are not cheap people. They're young people. They're big teams of people. And they're looking at every piece of the entire process, the entire industry. I think there's much smarter people coming to the game with deep resources. And some of that resource is an understanding of how markets work. And all markets evolve exactly the same way. It doesn't matter if it's natural gas, crude oil, copper, Tesla introducing electric cars. His main goal isn't to make money and be a car company. It's like, hey, I want the EV world to actually come about. And so you found people who are willing to invest $60,000 in a car to help that thesis out. What's the difference in Bitcoin? Bitcoin does have a beautiful thesis, right? If you haven't read the white paper, everybody should. Just because it's called a white paper doesn't mean it's a doctorate from us, that you can't understand it. It's a beautiful thesis that solves a whole set of problems, and that the legacy analog world doesn't solve and will never solve, because we're moving away from an analog world. You wouldn't put a horse and buggy in the streets of London and say, hey, go compete with Uber. I don't see any 8-track tapes back there on your desk where you're listening to, Eagle on an 8-track tape. I mean, the odds of you listening to a cassette tape is next to zero. And your children will never see one. They'll be like, oh, wow, that was in the 50s.
Oh, records are coming back in style these days.
Not on scale, right? So because you just can't fit enough music on that big old, I can't travel with the record in my car. So I got 30,000 pieces of music on my phone. Like you would have said that was impossible 10 years ago, right? That I'm paying what, $10 a month? So I think the world has already become extremely digitized. And to think that our financial markets aren't going to also be digitized and more efficient. I mean, can anybody say that the financial markets are really hyper efficient?
Well, it's amazing. They're running on, they are digitized pretty much, but they're running on these, 20, 30-year-old systems, sometimes 40-year-old systems. I don't know if you know SEI. Yeah. They're like the company that builds a lot of the back-end banking software that banks use. I think they have a pretty large market share of the global bank industry. They're based right here in Philly. They're in Collegeville, Pennsylvania, right outside of Philly. Massive campus. I've been in their office before. Beautiful art collection in there, by the way. It's pretty wild. But it's amazing that their software is like 30 years old, and some of the stuff they have deployed is so old, and they just can't update it because the risk, the amount of manpower and risk and compliance hoops you have to jump through. It's just a safer, easier bet just to keep what you have today, and that only goes so long. I mean, you look at the Southwest Airlines thing that happened a few weeks ago. Totally. It was because their routing system was phone calls. They had like a centralized office you had to call into to route planes, and the pilots and the what do you call them? The pilots and the stewardess, the people on the planes would have to call in to figure out, all right, what airport do I go to? What plane am I on? What cities am I going to? Where do I go after that? And then the phone system went down, so no one knew where to go or where they should be.
Crazy. Yeah, I have stories of, I think most people don't understand that the example that you gave of SEI, that is the financial industry. I mean, like large banks have relationships with other large banks, and they're actually using the backbone of the other bank. I think it was first Bank of America. I probably shouldn't even mention names, but two very large banks basically combined their activities. Took them 10 years to put the activities together. 10 years ago, they said, look, this is no longer working. The construct by which we created this partnership 30 years ago, neither one of us can actually deal with the marketplace we're dealing with. So let's unwind this relationship. It took 10 years.
That seems fast.
Yeah, but I mean, like
for a bank,
what opportunities did they miss, right?
Usually it's 10 years just to talk about it. And then, then you do something really slow after that.
and that's why companies like Node 40 pop up, right? Because this recent company I invested in, or Chargebacks 911 for that matter. I mean, this business was around for 50 years. CB 911 shows up, looks at chargebacks and says, this is ridiculous. And that viewpoint came from my commodity experience, where there aren't any refunds and disputes. They're like, no, I just sold you $10 million worth of nat gas, dude. You're long now. I'm short, and you figure it out. I'll buy it back from you for $9 million. But those markets work really, really well. The 20th century models are all breaking apart. There's too many friction problems. The customer doesn't like it. The banks don't like it. And so whether it's Bitcoin or some other solution, other solutions are going to fill these gaps. And that's what great companies like Chargebacks 911, Node 40, the Googles of the world, these companies filled up a big gap, saw a big gap, took a big bet, and served that market. So that's why I like these disruption periods, because they create opportunities for smart people to look at the gaps and bring a real service in.
Yeah, we're definitely in a disruption period, no doubt. The next few years are going to be that. Talk to me about your background. I want to hear more, starting with the energy or the, I think you said energy and commodities trading, and then getting into CB 911. And then, now you're in the crypto space with Node 40. And I think you mentioned some other things on our call the other day. Talk to me about that evolution for yourself.
Yeah, well, studied economics and marketing in a small college in Louisiana. Got a job in the oil and gas business right after I finished school. I was not clear on what I was going to do. I hear these people that know exactly what they were going to do. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was happy to get a job. Remember, there were more people looking for jobs than ever before. Talked myself into going to work for a company called United Gas Pipeline, which was a 36-inch pipeline from Laredo, Texas to Houston.
One single pipeline, that was the whole business?
It was a multitude of pipelines, but across Texas. But I was placed in Corpus Christi with a guy named Ron, who was 27. I was 21. And our job was to fill a 36-inch pipeline, monster pipeline, okay? I think it was 2 BCF a day, 2 billion cubic feet a day. It was completely empty. And so I was able to go work for a company, had to learn how to read big, fat contracts. I mean, like hundreds and hundreds of pages that were built 30 years prior. All these constructs were built 30 years prior. Natural gas was priced on CPI inflation indexes, so the price always went up. I showed up to the market, it was $7.35. And it didn't matter if you were 12 feet away from the pipeline or 12 miles from the pipeline. The price was $7.35. And I was 21 years old. I looked at Ron one day, and imagine a pipeline sitting here completely empty. And right next door was Amoco was drilling, or Mobil, Conoco was drilling a pipeline. I mean, drilling a hole in the ground. I mean, like within 12 feet, you could literally throw a rock at it. And I went to my boss and said, look, why don't we offer this guy $7 instead of $7.35? He's 12 feet from us. He's not going to build a pipeline 30 miles to the next guy. And my boss said, we don't trade on nickels and dimes. And I was like, whoa, you want me to buy 2 BCF a day? And you're willing to leave 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 cents on the table? And that was really mind-boggling to me. It never left my mind. Whew, really, you guys don't trade on the pennies, huh? And I realized, oh, y'all aren't really competitors. You're actually a club. Everybody in the energy business is a club. You're not really competing with each other. And that was validated by the golf games with the competitors. And, it's like, oh, this isn't really a competitive environment. I thought coming out of school, the world was like a baseball team. Like, hey, there's winners and losers, and that's it. And so that was my first education in real business was, oh, the game's not really played the way that I thought. There was a company called Natural Gas Clearinghouse that was formed in 1986, and I love the name of the company. I was working for a company called XYZ Energy Company, and I think it was Seagull Energy or something. I'm like, what do they do? They were all producer. But Natural Gas Clearinghouse told me, oh, wow, they want to clear natural gas. I can understand that. I got a job with them. Smartest people I'd ever met in my life. I would have literally gone to work for free. I was making 70 grand a year working for this big, well-known company. It was a resume maker. And I was like, I can't wait to get out of here. The people, I didn't like the people. I thought they didn't know what they were doing. A lot of management constraints. These young guys that were all 27 years old were trying to shake up a whole market. So I effectively went to work for a startup at 27. Almost got fired 2 or 3 times just because I couldn't figure out how to jump on their train. Their train would change, man. They're going south, and then the wind starts blowing. They're going north because it's a small company, right? They're trying to they're chasing safe margins. We built from scratch, seriously, this is a crazy story, a Fortune 30 company. And I remember when we almost couldn't pay the bills. I remember when ExxonMobil, Conoco, Shell, Amoco all told me, hey, you should come work for us. This is not a living. You're never going to make a living doing this. They tried to scare me. The markets don't work this way. Hospitals are going to go dark. People are going to die. I mean, the stuff we heard from those that were already in the club about disrupting any part of that construct that had been put in place was going to destroy the Americas, right? People were going to die in the streets. None of that happened. In 3 years after joining there, I realized that I wasn't probably going to ever be able to move up in the company because of the age of all the senior people. And I asked to go to London to see if I could poke around and look at building a business. A British firm had bought a part of our company. They laughed at me. I think we were 300 people at the time, which I joined at 12. So I'm like, hey, this is already too big. And long story, I ended up going to London on a 6-month assignment, and came back 10 years later, had built 2 monster businesses, man. I mean, it was unbelievable. I was able to, because I didn't have anyone there to support me, I didn't have any bosses. I had to learn how to work with regulators, get known by the marketplace and not be hated.
That was fun, probably, right?
Oh, it was a blast. It was an absolute blast because I was given a blank canvas and I had bosses who didn't get fixated on what that canvas ended up looking like, as long as it showed, hey, this is a business and it's growing. That business, we didn't do anything for 2 years. Everyone laughed at me because we were oversold as intellectual capital. But within 2 years, we made $120 million. with 12 people.
Wow. What year was that?
1995.
Wow. Okay.
I had been there since 92.
That was like, so those are the days you were coming up neck and neck with Enron then, kind of their.
Enron was a block from me. They had 6,000 employees. They were spending $1 million sterling a day just in overhead. I was literally one block down the street from, I had 600 people by the time I was done, but I'd also bought all the storage, natural gas storage in the United Kingdom. Like 97% of all the storage got bought by me over a lunch table at the Lanesborough Hotel. A man that I had met with twice a year, like religion, twice a year I would meet with him. His name was Niall. And 10 of those meetings would result in nothing. I'm always flabbergasted by these chief operating officers at these companies go, hey, you went to a trade show. What's the return on investment? There isn't one, dude. Okay. There isn't a return on investment at a convention. There's not a return on investment with Niall. 10 lunches, like in 10 months. There's not a return on investment until there is. And that return was monster. It was massive. I had to have those 10 meetings with him to develop a trust from him that when I said I could do something, he was sure I could do it.
Plus, you don't know, like you plant one seed, creates one relationship. That relationship might do business a year or two later. And then that relationship might turn into 3 more. And then those 3 more each turn into 5 more. And then it just, it's impossible to measure. You can't measure the effects of that.
It's not possible. So so anyway, that was a great journey. But it really taught me a lot about the fundamentals. And I had to learn what does it cost an oil producer to drill a hole in the ground? What does it cost for the guy to build a pipe? And where does it, all the way through the entire food chain? When you do that, this is before derivatives. Okay. So derivative markets, futures, options, and those type paper contracts only show up after the physical market is handled. And that's what Bitcoin's going through right now. Hey, what's the physical market like, right? So anyway, 2002 comes around. My boss said we were going to make $1 billion in cash the next year. I sold all my stock within 30 minutes. I'd never sold a drop of stock. And because of the way I look at markets, I looked at him, even though I loved him, admired him. I realized that he had drank too much of his own Kool-Aid. It was impossible for us to make $1 billion. We were a mark-to-market company. And for a company that can manufacture earnings through mark-to-market, it's impossible to move to cash.
That's exactly what Enron did. And then they just kind of
we all did.
Flew too close to the sun and,
Well, the regulators in the accounting companies let us do it. So
I actually had I had a friend of mine. He was like episode 6 or 7. He was a partner at Anderson. He didn't have anything to do with Enron. He was on the IT.
None of them did.
What's that?
None of them did. They're all gone, right?
Yeah. He was over on Anderson's gone completely, but they were like, that was when it was the big 5 back then. But he was on the IT services side of the business, so not involved in Enron, but like he was sharing the story of how quickly and how just suddenly this massive multi-billion-dollar consulting company, auditing, tax, IT services company just collapsed. Almost like, it was weeks. It just happened so fast in the rubble of the Enron situation. And it's amazing that, just the aftermath of all that was just so amazing how detrimental it was to so many businesses.
Yeah. So my timing was really good. I think timing is really important. I think I sold everything in 01. They got wiped out late 01.
You got it. You friends with Marty McFly or something?
No. My timing was, but I've always had good timing, man. But I trust my instincts, and so I came back to the United States. Took 6 or 7 years off. I had this compelling push to stay in business because of what people would think. And I'm like, this is crazy. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm not going to spend the next 20 years of my life doing energy. I'm bored with it. So I took off enough time to prove, could a human being take time off, 6, 7, 8 years, completely contrary to what everyone tells you, and then create a new career if you want to, based on what you want to do. Came back to the States, moved to LA. About 2005, ran into a person who knew about the credit card industry, and they dragged me into that industry. I played around with it, put some money to work for 2 years, being a retailer, selling anything online, just to see, hey, what happens when you sell something online? Can you scale?
2005. What were you selling back then?
I wasn't really selling anything other than, hey, I want to put money to work to see how the payment system works, right? Whether it was water or whatever, you can sell anything, T-shirts or, and then we realized the chargebacks were a massive problem. And I think we hired 5 different experts to help us, spent $7 million on fraud solutions. Our fraud didn't go away. Our problem.
So the chargebacks for you, are those like a return when a customer buys a pair of jeans and says,
That's
hey, they don't fit? Or is this more like someone, I've seen a lot, we do e-commerce at Curotech, and I've seen, companies go and, we have a couple of jewelry stores as clients. So constantly they deal with this where someone will go in and buy like a $5,000 engagement ring and pay with the credit card. And then, sure enough, like 5-7 days later, the charge is declined because it's a, stolen card and someone catches it on their account.
Yep.
And so that happens all the time. So you have to, like, these stores have to know how to deal with that and deal with the fraud. There's, some solutions coming out for that. But how do you guys, like, what do you guys handle? Do you handle the fraud side of it or the return side, or both?
Well, the refund is a refund, but refunds sometimes look like chargebacks. Chargeback is a bad event. Okay, you as the merchant pay a fine for getting the chargeback. It's a fee. Whether you win the chargeback or not, you still pay the fine, and you carry a bruise on your P&L in the eyes of your acquiring bank, Visa, Mastercard, right? So they don't like them. They think it's a way to see fraudulent behavior. I totally disagree with this. Chargebacks were designed 50 years ago to get you comfortable with using your credit card at a store, because before then you use cash or checks. And the merchant had about an 8% lossage from NSF and money laundering and stuff like that. The credit card was designed to get rid of cash. Sound familiar? Designed to get rid of cash and to alleviate all the problems related to cash and checks, which, by the way, is worse today than it was for the problem that we're trying to solve. You now have a 1 or 2% chargeback rate. There's 500 million chargeback events, single chargeback events a year in Visa, Mastercard, American Express, and Discover's universe. And that is crazy. Okay. $500 billion in losses. Wow. 60,000 people employed in the chargeback dispute industry, of which I think there's 60,000 amateurs doing this, all with a conflicted bias interest, and they only see their own chargebacks. Billy Bob Bank only sees his own chargebacks. Netflix only sees his own chargebacks. How does he know what normal is? We see them all. Airlines, hotels, motels, high risk, low risk, pornography, gaming, gambling, whatever. All chargebacks should be the same. So we just saw this massive problem, have built an unbelievable business, have no debt, no outside equity. And we built the business based on old fundamentals. Take a customer in, provide really good value to them, and make a profit on them. Every customer we make a profit on, but we provide tremendous value. Spent the last 10 or 12 years really blowing that business up. About 4 or 5 years ago, I started getting bored, because I do, because I know where the game ends now. I know exactly how this business, I would predict that chargebacks end up being resolved in a centralized space. I don't have the patience and the time to keep beating the drum. There's 350 people there. It's run by somebody that does a really good job. So I start looking at other stuff, and I studied the whole crypto universe for about maybe 500 hours, 700 hours. and ran into Node 40 in November, December. I see Node 40 as a compliance, regulatory, tax, accounting, tracing, and tracking technology to deal with digital assets. And whether it's crypto or Solana or NFTs or anything that is going to be digitized, we need to be able to account for them. And Node 40 looks to me identical to Chargebacks 911 in its construct. The only difference is you are mandated to do your accounting and taxes. This is no longer an option that the guy in Puerto Rico is going to I'm not doing it this year, which, by the way, that's a massive mistake. A guy that's making a 20% savings on his tax exposure should probably be spending a lot more money than he is on professional accounting, because when he comes to hand those assets over to his son or his daughter and he's dead, who's going to show the now human being that's exposed to the government for taxation what dad actually did for the past 10 years?
I've never heard anyone talk about that before.
Dude, this is a monster risk. Okay, Node 40 alone for me could just be sold to people that are selling, that are inheriting and or divorcing.
Wow.
One business model, one service, Node 40 is very, very important for.
Have you heard of TRM Labs?
Yeah.
So my one of my good friends, his son is the founder, and they've raised a lot of money. I think they've raised over 100 million at this point. But are they a competitor of Node 40, or what are they?
No, actually, I think an introduction by you would be good. I don't think there's any friction whatsoever. I think actually there's some real synergy. They're like a Chainalysis or an Elliptic.
Yeah, they do a forensics. They actually started out as analytics for ICOs, and then the ICO thing kind of went away. And then they pivoted to, I think this was after they raised their A round. They pivoted to the forensics, and they've built a pretty amazing business from what I can see on the forensics. Yeah,
the forensic piece on this is the interesting piece to me, because one, it doesn't matter whether it's Bitcoin's at $1 or $10 million. These are the tools that are required for this industry to mature. And I'm a big believer in, hey, let's us regulate versus being told what to do, because I think we're better off as an industry to self-regulate than have some 800-year-old gray hair guy telling me what to do. Or worse even, 10 different gray hair guys from 10 different nations all coming up with bizarre analog regulatory, like GDPR in the payments industry and some of these European compliance things. Total training.
Well, that's what's about to happen, though. What's the Coinbase Brian?
Rose.
Yeah, I just heard a podcast with him the other day. I think it was All In podcast with the VC guys. He's talking with the regulators now. I guess he's trying to kind of influence the regulations, and he's probably saying a little bit more diplomatically than the way you just said it. But I'm sure he's probably feeling that frustration. It goes back to what those congressional hearings when Mark Zuckerberg was on the stand, and they're trying to blame all these things on him. And sure, he's got a big company, and he's any company that size might blur the lines a little bit, but for him to try to explain simple things about how Facebook works, like the Cambridge Analytica thing, it just was totally over their heads. You could tell they had no clue. Based on the questions they're asking, they had no clue about how a large social platform company like that works.
Yeah. Well, that's a fairly complicated example you use, because I think that I'm not sure anybody would have ever understood his answers. There was something naughty going on there, right? I'm flabbergasted there's still an operating business based on that. But this is the world we live in now. Just pay 100 million, $1 billion, and keep on going.
Well, same thing happened. Google, they went on the stand, and Bezos, I think, had to. And once, I guess.
They all do now. I actually have come to believe that it's a badge of honor to get a regulatory slap on the hand. It's like, okay, I got your attention. I'm big enough now to get your attention. I mean, really, it's become a revenue stream. There's a P&L there, U.S. government fees and fines. So I think once you start making money that way, it's hard to not continue wanting to make money that way.
Yeah. Well, maybe one day it'll be a Node 40 or a CB 911 congressional hearing.
Well, blockchain, right? Blockchain. Man. Let's just be transparent. I think the point I'm trying to make, though, is that the market, although everybody keeps saying that it's not globalizing, and I do believe that it has grossly fractured, we'll end up with centers, which is awesome from my background and experience, that we end up with trading centers, and inside those trading centers, we're going to have separate currencies. The U.S. government's going to hate this because they're going to lose their petrodollar construct, but they've lost.
You also can't track it either. It's you can't centralize it and figure out there's some tools like that's what TRM Labs does for the government, is helps them track crypto, but it's still harder. You can't go to a couple banks and say, hey, we need a back door.
Yeah, no, I think hard is probably the right word, but you're not going to use 20th century tools to do it. And so I think, like, we don't find it hard. Like, if I had your crypto position, I would literally give you a report probably in 30 minutes. It would take your accounting firm 2 weeks to run through the same math. I think once the tool is built for purpose, and I think TRM will tell you this too, once it's built for purpose, he had to pivot, right? Well, he pivoted because he saw the value in what he had. I love guys that pivot. That tells me that they don't get locked into what their first business model was. I knew our first business model was not retail. I was literally using the retail as a casino to go, okay, how does $99 work versus $39? Do you have more problems, less problems? How do you get a client to stay on? And then what do refunds cost? I mean, I learned everything about who all is making money in the whole ecosphere. It's so complicated, the payments industry. It is like very, very fractured. But I don't think that necessarily tracking, tracing, and accounting for digital assets is complicated. It's extremely complicated if you're trying to drill a hole in the ground and you're using a spoon, right? And that's kind of what, you're not going to use real estate accounting tools to track digital. It's just a very unique method because these are fractured units of an asset.
I think there's certain small teams, though, in the government that are really sophisticated, and then the government as a whole is extremely inefficient. And it's to get large scale, the kind of scalability you need to track all of this across a global network. I think they're going to struggle with it.
Well, it's amazing what $80 billion will solve. I don't think the government will solve it. I think those that are serving the marketplace will solve it. And who are they? They're the advisory firms, the accounting firms, the consulting firms. There's 13,000 accounting firms in the United States alone.
It'll be a new breed, like TRMs. It'll be a new breed. Like, have you seen Anduril, Palmer Luckey's new company?
No.
So he's taken on. So Palmer Luckey was the founder of Oculus. Yeah. Sold it to Facebook. Now he's building Anduril, which is making basically war technology, like drone strike systems and missile technologies and autonomous helicopters and all sorts of stuff. And I think they just won a $5 billion contract. I'm pretty sure it was in the billions for sure, yeah. But I think it was five with the DoD.
Interesting.
Pretty wild, yeah.
Yeah. Just coming out of gaming and stuff like that. See,
31 years old.
Real world applications here. Real world applications.
Yeah. So the Boeings and the Lockheed Martins and there's a new set of startups building these government technologies, and another one is Palantir.
Yeah.
Another one. Yeah.
No, I think when you start looking at this information, like Node 40 right now, we deal with institutional grade type, somebody with more than $500,000 in digital assets or larger, high frequency traders, private offices, venture capital funds. The amount of interest from analog accounting firms, 13,000 of them, employing 2 million people. Once you have to check your box on your tax thing and say, hey, I own a digital asset, the accounting firm is going to be required to create a cost base and a financial track record for that asset, whether you sell it or not. Like, people don't understand, hey, you still have to track for this every year. Don't wake up in 10 years and go, hey, what the hell did I do? And you're not going to remember. I mean, this is really complicated.
Well, you do this with stock portfolios now. Like they send you the documents though every year. They'll send you, how much you sold. I think you only report what you realize though. You don't report all your positions on the tax return. But yeah, this
is the problem. Okay, like, I'm a large enough player that I can't, as much as I like Brian, I can't, as a fiduciary, put all my coins in one place. It's just too much exposure for me. It'd be like me keeping all my banking with Truist, right? I have to spread it around a little bit. If for no other reasons, insurance purposes. So what am I going to do? Get 8 reports from 8 different companies on my crypto position? What happens when I move one position from Coinbase to Ledger? They're going to provide me the same service? Like, this needs to be done. This is another great example of a centralized activity, being able to bring in all of my exchanges and wallets and being able to produce an agnostic report on all of that activity. Because, good example, I gave an accountant all my transactions, including a transfer from Coinbase to Coinbase Pro. And they said to the U.S. government that I owed $500,000 in taxes. Okay, they don't understand. They thought that transfer was a liquidation event. So not only do we have to educate you, the user, on the mistakes you're making, and you are making mistakes. I've made every one of them you can imagine. The more details I have and the more I can look at my position, really understand my position. Like, next podcast guy you have, ask him, hey, what's your cost base in your Ledger wallet? What's your cost base on Ether in your Coinbase? He will not be able to answer the question.
Yeah, you have to track it on a spreadsheet because you don't get that information from the exchange. Yeah,
well, do a deal with me and you'll get it every day delivered to your freaking phone. Like, I don't understand why it's not on your phone.
That's what you're doing at Node 40, though. It sounds pretty interesting. Huh?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And that's what the TRMs will do, right? Because once you have this data, you begin looking at the value of the data. Like, my professionals around me, I'm in the middle of a divorce. Having the Node 40 data was like, I'm not the weak person in the room. All the professionals are the weak people because they don't know what they don't know. To be able to give them a report that's 3 pages instead of 16 different printouts from 8 different exchanges. Oh, it made it so helpful. Everyone saw me being transparent. You couldn't argue with it. Literally diffused all of their fodder they were going to throw at the judge, right? Going, this guy's a crazy guy. Well, didn't look to the judge like I was crazy because I had all my stuff. Poof, here you go. No problem. Probably saved me $100,000 in legal fees now. Right? Just being pencil whipped by the lawyers and the accountants and, hey, we need to look at this a little deeper. And so we're just talking about bringing 21st century tools into the proper marketplace.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm checking out the site now, and it's interesting.
One of the analogies I use that I think you'll appreciate is if I'm driving my Volkswagen at 10 miles an hour, I can text, I can listen to music, and I can talk to my kids all at the same time, right? If I'm driving a Lamborghini at 130 miles an hour, try texting. Okay. And why am I saying it this way? Imagine if your screen on your Lamborghini, you're doing 180 miles an hour, 150, whatever, and you don't see any displays. Your windshield, you no longer see any of that either. Like, you're going to get in a wreck. And I see people doing this with digital assets. They have a $500,000 position, or they have a position that they think in 10 years is going to be $500,000, and they don't invest in the right tools to fully understand their business. I look at people like that and go, okay, you're an amateur. What's the word for it? You're not a devote. It's a certain phrase for somebody that plays in a market, but they're not really experts. I think, you can actually identify who the real players are by the tools that they're surrounding themselves with. So that's why I get excited about the business, because it's bringing real value to family offices, venture capital firms, risk management teams. Half our customers don't even use us for accounting. They're using us for risk management. A good 90% of the people that are using TRM should also be using Node 40. So there's even crossover here that we haven't begun to, for lack of a better word, exploit or really fully understand. So I think you're going to see a lot of players start acquiring businesses like this or building these type of services to do a couple of things. One, serve its clients who, where I come from, they are my masters. My clients are my masters, right? But I think also if I'm a Binance or a Coinbase or a KPMG or anybody that's in this space in a big way, to be able to bring compliant tools to the marketplace and show the regulator you're doing absolutely everything you can to make all the proper tools available for your investors, how can that be a bad thing?
I was just about to ask you, why do you think Coinbase or Binance hasn't built something like this into their platform?
I think Coinbase has. I think there's been a lot of deals already done. Whether those deals make 1,000%, I think a lot of deals were done when the market was extremely toppy and maybe people didn't think through some of the machinations. But I think a number of these companies have made investments in this space. And I think, you didn't have a lot of the political carnage until recently, where everyone now is like, okay, is anyone doing anything? Like, when you find out a large private equity firm did 3 days of due diligence on, Sam Bankman-Fried, and they lost $500 million, kind of like, wow, what the heck's going on here? So,
I think they weren't doing due diligence. That was the thing. There's no board. They
were rushing the market, right? No, I'm talking about the investors, right? The guys that went into this deal. So
same thing. They never set up a board. Like, normally a VC would say you have to set up a board. We need board seats. We need, governance inside the company, and you'll do an audit, once a year, once a quarter, and report the audit results. And none of that was done. The investors just wrote blind checks.
I've never had an investment in Facebook because I didn't like his governance structure. The one lesson I've learned in my life is governance is absolutely key.
Especially in crypto right now,
especially in every business. Like, I can give you horror stories. Like, governance is really, really important. It's not so much important when the business is growing. It gets important when the business actually is grown or growing much better. And like on the Node 40 thing, I was like, hey, I wanted to know from the founders. Like, they wanted me because of my commercial strategic capability and understanding of how to work inside markets. I probably, was able to acquire that company. I think I can acquire other companies like this or invest in them at a discount to private equity and VC, because I'm helping them. The first thing I did with them was, okay, let's focus on everything that we're not going to do in the future. Literally, they had 5,000 clients that said, get rid of it. Like they weren't paying enough for the value that we bring. I see that founders do this a lot. They undervalue their products to the marketplace. And some overvalue it, but the big problem is they usually undervalue it in all types of ways too, not just pricing, but maybe the terms of the deal. So what I liked about the Node 40 guys is that if, I want to know, hey, if you make if we can sell this business for $100 million, are you going to be happy? I needed to understand, when do they become okay, I'm switched off. I'm no longer interested. And people do get that way. Because I wasn't really interested in getting into something that was going to be a small deal.
Yeah, you see it much bigger than that, I can tell. I mean, $100 million is not a small transaction, but there's like the type of people that want to get out at that life-changing event. And then there's people, like the Jeff Bezos of the world that want to build, the Elon Musks of the world that they just do it because they need to build something that just is so massive and impactful. It's like a disease in your brain to just have to keep going.
Yeah. Well, the cool thing is that if you're lucky enough to have one of those life-changing events, what I don't want to do is have two guys that are technologists. We get a bid for $50 million and they're like, dude, we're happy. Let's get the fuck out of here. Right. I didn't care what the answer was. I just wanted to know what the answer was. And so I think that I go back to governance, because governance helps me go, hey, okay, so that was your answer. My answer is I'm actually interested in really, really helping you guys. And so I'm going to have control over when we exit. And if you guys are comfortable with that, this is a match made in heaven. But what's the upside? Most people would look at the downside of that. I look at the upside and go, okay, here's two founders who are geeks, man. These are nerdy geek guys. Am I going to be able to help them focus on what they're great at? Or are we going to still be having M&A discussions? Because if they're M&A experts, then I don't know what I'm showing up for. If they're commercial strategists, well, why did you bring me on? Like, my partner in CB91, she is a great operator. But I'm the one with balls, man. I mean, I'm the one that says, hey, let's move to London for 4 years, move our kids, move everything, and know that we're probably going to take a $2 or $3 million top line revenue hit on our core business. Being a private company, I was like, let's go. If I had venture capital or PE money or public money, they'd be like, oh my God, your earnings went down for a quarter. Who cares, dude? I'm the largest independent chargeback dispute platform in the world. And it's because we moved to London for 4 years. Like, it's not because we stayed in the United States all comfy dealing with our little merchants. Like, we stretched and we performed. So for me, I think you got to know, like, and the business is bigger than we thought it would be. So the problem is, does the agenda change for the management team? So that's when you have governance and you have clarity on what you're trying to do, it makes the shareholders happier. It makes staff happier. Everybody understands where the train's going. And if you need to change tracks, that governance allows for you and I to make a decision. Hey, whose decision is this? Which track are we getting on? Somebody has to make a decision, right? At some point. So and a lot of these new companies, they don't even consider this kind of stuff. And I literally would not invest in Facebook because I'm like, Mark Zuckerberg, no, I'm not doing that. I have other things I can invest in besides having one punk white kid, pale face. Like, come on, man. When did you become God? I like, it's too big of a company for one person to be able to make a decision like that on.
That is true. Yeah, it's pretty wild that he's
I think that company will fail because of this. I think colossal failure. I don't see how these businesses, it is illogical, okay, that you would have someone so powerful at the board that they can do whatever. I don't think
the metaverse bet is interesting to me. I don't know where they're going with that, but I guess we'll find out.
But see, this is the one-headed decision maker, right? Like, wow. That was one guy going, we're going in the metaverse. We're going. Okay, dude. Like, see, Enron made that same decision. This sounds very the metaverse isn't going to make any money for a long time.
Yeah.
Right? Not really. I mean, not lots of money. I mean,
it may never
already in the
never
metaverse.
Take off.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the crypto side of things. And I'm surprised you haven't asked about pricing and where the market's headed, but that's why I got involved in the Node 40 business. And
when you say pricing, you mean crypto pricing?
Yeah, marketplaces.
I don't need to ask about that, man. It's up and down every day. Who cares? Whatever. I just go along on it, right?
Yeah, that's
right. But pricing, though, I was curious about Node 40. I don't see a pricing page on the site. Is this how do you guys, how do you sell it?
Well, if you're an individual user, get your accounting firm on a call and let's talk to them. We really want to deal with your professional, and we'll bill him. If I'm a user, I ask all my accounting firms, hey, what solution are you using to do digital assets? That's an absolute essential question for you to start asking.
You're really selling this to the accounning firms then to deploy across all their...
I'm selling this to people like Goldman Sachs who want to deploy it throughout their ecosphere, or a large accounting firm, whether it's an independent firm or, some of these firms have 10,000 digital users. I mean, what are they doing? So that's the ideal scene for us because they already have distribution. Secondly, I don't want to be in accounting. Okay. I am a big data company. I want to be able to provide the accounting companies who see your portfolio wholly. I don't see your portfolio whole. I don't see what your real estate is. I don't see what your losses are on this other deal over here. But I'm able to give the Node 40 data to my accounting firm. And then they're able to look at my real estate, the stuff they understand, and go, hey, let's take losses right now on this stuff, right? Which is what Saylor did this year. Okay, Saylor, I'll never sell. Well, he forgot to tell people, I'll never sell unless it really makes a lot of sense on tax purposes. Well, that's why he sold, okay? He sold because he would have been stupid not to sell. He needed data.
Well, then you buy it back after. You buy it back a month later.
He bought it back 22
I mean, I did the same thing this year with a bunch of stocks I have. Sold them out in December, buy them back in February.
That's right. And that is what you should do. The question is that he didn't share with you is which coins do you pick to do that? If you don't have, and I'm not pitching anything to anybody, like I'll make a wager to anybody, $10,000, that in an Excel spreadsheet, you cannot actually determine what your cost base is per lot of what you should transfer. I asked somebody a question one day. I said, hey, I'm in a divorce and I'm a really nice human being. Okay. I have no interest in taking anything from my ex-wife or the kids, or I just don't believe in that. The question though is, if I have a $69,000 coin and I have an $8,000 coin, which one should I give her? Because the accounting and tax people and all the forensics and
you're talking about your cost basis, right? Not your current price.
No. What are the? Yeah, exactly. I'm talking about the coins I bought in 2016 and the coins I bought in 2022. Which ones did she get?
Does it matter?
Which ones?
They're both the same now, right?
Huh?
They're both the same now. Does it matter?
No, they're not the same. One's got a tax cost of $8,000 and one's got a tax cost of $69,000.
You're right. Okay. So would you transfer the coins to her? Or?
Say that again.
Would you transfer the coins to her, or would you liquidate to USD and then do that?
Well, see, okay, and that's probably the right answer. But I don't want to liquidate. Why would you want to liquidate an $8,000 coin? Because see, I bought these for my children. I didn't buy them for me and Monica to be able to buy cars with or planes. I bought them to give to the children. I have 600 AR-15s sitting in a storage facility one day. Guy looked at me and said, why would anybody need 600 AR-15s? I'm like, dude, I bought them for $500 each. Okay, are you telling me in 100 years they're not going to be worth? I have a $40,000 Thompson submachine gun. I think it's worth $200,000 one day. Like these are antiques at some point, right? Untouched, unboxed, pristine. Is it going to go below $500? It's an inflation hedge for me. So to me, the Bitcoin, that $8,000 coin, I'm going to give that to Mia, and Mia optimizes her inheritance tax, minimizes her inheritance tax exposure when she's 34. Okay. And when I gave it to her in the trust. Now, the problem is if she has no history of how these $8,000 coins got to her, the tax man is going to rip her off. That's his job. He's got a P&L. If I would have given her,
how would they, if you don't have the history, I guess it's stored on the chain. So someone will be able to tell on the chain based on what that coin was purchased for versus what it's worth today to be able to know what the tax liability is. But you're saying if she doesn't know what the cost basis is, how does she, not get ripped off by the tax man? That's what you're saying?
Yes. I think if I hand over $20 million position of crypto to a top 30 accounting firm, and they saw a Coinbase movement to Coinbase Pro, and they said, hey, that is a $500,000 tax event, I'm pretty much sure they don't know what they're talking about. And I'm pretty sure that the tax man is going to look at this in 20 years. Okay, these 20 years from now, the U.S. government would be broke, completely, utterly broke. And, you made a comment just a little while ago, all these companies getting FTC'd and this antitrust and that antitrust. This is a money grab now. Okay, so I think the governments, why do you buy Bitcoin? I'm worried about draconian governments. I'm worried about people taking my stuff. Okay, well, do you think the tax man is going to try and take it or not? If a 35-year-old kid can't defend the position, and let's assume this is not a small position, by that time, there'll be years and years of Bitcoin acquired in various wallets all over the place. Fucking, shit's moved around.
Different cost bases, and you won't be able to do that on a spreadsheet, especially if you have any kind of sizable.
No chance. Okay, yeah. How does a high frequency trader account when he's doing 100 million transactions?
It's all software.
A month. Okay. Well, it's not just all software. Some of this has to be done. It's just too big of a spreadsheet to make any meaning from, right? He needs a dashboard that he can keep drilling down into.
That's what I mean. It's like a software that's automated. It's not software that somebody's punching in data into manually. It's software that's tracking the activity. It's the trades are algorithmic, and then the reporting on the trades is, handled through the algorithm.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think what I was trying to say was that the same tool that you use for accounting cannot possibly be used for a high frequency player, because the high frequency guy is not really using it for accounting. Well, he is using it for accounting. He's using it for risk management and a third party view, but he's not using it for tax, right? He's probably also using it to make sure that whatever jurisdiction he's playing in, that he can have a third party say, hey, this is what this cat did. Right. And there's value there saying, this is what I approve this guy's trades today. He did a bunch of trades on BTC and this is what it was priced at. He made $500. If you're doing weighted average costs like most people do, in the scenario where you take a tax loss, I'm going to suggest that you made the wrong decision because you wanted to maximize tax losses, but you used weighted average cost basis.
You should have sold your oldest coins then.
You should have sold your most. Well, I think one, you talk to your accountant. Two, hey, what's the number I'm trying to hit? Oh, I made $2 million. I want to minimize my tax exposure. That's how you do loss tax management, right? What is my number, Mr. Accountant? You have $2 million, $200,000 of income you need to displace. Okay, go find 200 grand. Go search for it. Where's
you have to like amortize that though over you can only take so much of a loss, right? And you have to amortize it over what 10 years or 5 years or something.
I don't know specifically what the rules are on the amortization, but nonetheless, you're still trying to maximize. So and you're trying to make the right decisions. And I don't think if you're just keep putting coins into a bucket and they get commingled and you have this kind of volatility. Remember, we got like massive volatility, right? 8,000, like 17,000, 69, 4,000, 34,000. I mean, freaking my sailor's net position is $37,000. he's so far out of the money right now. I think that's an awesome price to buy this stuff at, right? So, which ones does he move? Does he move the expense? Like, it'd be really interesting to see what he did and how he got there. So Node 40 really is about making the user, without knowing how to do all of this, much more intelligent in their decision making, and more importantly, to make the professionals around him intelligent. And that's where it all breaks down, because the professional, it only has as much data as they have expertise on. And we have a brand new industry that's popped up here in the last really 3 or 4 years, right? Really 3 or 4 years, this thing's okay. Just to the point where you're starting to get regulation. So this is a brand new market.
It's exciting times.
It is, dude. This is early times. Okay. This is.
It's like mid 90s for the internet right now.
Yes, I agree with that. I totally agree with that. And I go back to the Enron and the energy debacle. People talk about 2008, 2001. I didn't see any commerce stop. I didn't see any electricity stop. Prices might have been different for a few days, right? Extreme pricing happens. And I love extreme pricing. I mean, if I would have been.
If anything, the electricity works better after Enron went under.
Oh, that market works. That market works very well. My point is,
they were doing the blackouts in California though to screw with the markets.
Well, there's blackouts there. Nobody's talking about the blackouts that are happening right now. Enron's not anywhere to be seen. Yeah. There's blackouts in California on a regular basis for a lot of weird reasons, weirder than Enron. At least you could understand what Enron was doing. But I happen to believe in markets. And if you believe that capitalism is the best thing going, I think price, somebody, was belittling the other day that 20% of all Bitcoin's been lost. My answer to that is the reason 20% of Bitcoin has been lost, the proper value was not placed on Bitcoin. Okay. The only people that lost a bunch of coins were priced at $300, $200, $1. I don't see Max Kaiser giving any of his BTC away today at 23,000. Okay, he was just giving it away at 100, which made a lot of sense, right? I know that was a smart move, but I think when the right price is put on a commodity, people behave correctly. And I think gasoline prices in the United States are extremely low, by double. Why? Because people go to the grocery store to buy a pack of cigarettes, man. If gasoline was priced correctly, they would not do that. They'd go grocery shopping and do everything at one time, right? You leave your laptops on and all your computers on overnight. Electricity is priced poorly. If electricity was priced correctly, you'd turn everything off. Everything off. Like you turn it all off. It's too cheap. Therefore, we waste. There's enough power consumption in the United Kingdom that if all you did was remove the plug from the TV, one entire coal-fired power station. Like we have become such a spoiled world of everything has to be instant on. So I think we're going to see a world through digitization actually price products correctly.
Did you clear your cash flow?